Hey guys, I'm Erin and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm bringing you my June wrap up. So I had been doing these in two parts to split SFF into one video and the other books I read into another, but due to my lack of filming time during this summer, I'm going to try and do it in one video and hopefully squeeze it in to be one normal length video. We'll see how I do because this was tied as my highest reading month of the year, so fingers crossed I can get through these in a reasonable time. So in June, I read 19 books, of which 10 were fantasy, 5 were romance, 3 were mystery, and 1 was science fiction. This was largely in part due to, or the volume I read was largely in part due to the shelf space readathon I participated in June, because let me tell you, competitions with points and winners involved very much motivate me and get very into it. So I was on the Team Demeter, and while we did not win, I had a great time with my team. Everyone on our team was very lovely, and I still had a fun time. So let's get started. I'm just going to go through these in the order that I read them. So the first book I read in June was an adult romance called How Sweet It Is by Dylan Newton. I received an e-arc of this from NetGalley and it came out in June. So this is a contemporary adult romance about a wedding planner who is asked to plan the book launch of a famous horror novelist. And I just thought this was really fun and, as the title implies, very sweet. I thought both main characters were very likable. They had a very fun first meeting and just them getting to know each other in this like small town. I loved the small town vibes. It was just a very sweet story. I did think the conflict was a little too silly, and I have a pretty good bar for kind of silly conflicts in romance. I just kind of accept that as part of the genre, but it was a little silly to me. I just felt some of the assumptions made were kind of wildly out of character, but overall this was still a 4-star book, and I would definitely recommend this to anyone who reads contemporary romance, as it was just a fun little read. Next, I read The Queen of Sorrow by Beth Durst. This is the third and final book in the adult fantasy series, The Queens of Renthia, and I thought this was a very solid conclusion to this trilogy. I think book 2 was still my favorite of the 3, but I still definitely enjoyed this one. This one did take me the longest to get into in the beginning of the 3, but once I did, very much enjoyed it. It built on a lot of where the second book kind of left off without being too spoilery, and I think Beth Durst did a really good job in taking the story the direction she took it in, and I think she really nailed and pulled off the ending she wanted. I think just worked very well for what she wanted. Whether or not it's the ending I think everyone wanted, I think that's one thing I've seen kind of complain in some of the slightly more negative reviews, is they didn't necessarily like the ending, but I think she did a good job pulling off the ending, in my opinion. I would definitely recommend this trilogy to fantasy fans, and I'm definitely intrigued in reading more of this author after having completed the trilogy. Next, I read Well Met by Jen DeLuca. This is another adult contemporary romance. This is about Simon, who runs a local Renaissance fair in this small town, and Emily, who is being dragged into volunteering for this fair for the first time by her niece. And they start out butting heads and then end up falling in love, and I really like this. I love the setting of the Renaissance fair, and I'm definitely interested in reading the rest of the series, honestly, for the setting. As a baseline, I just love that. I also really liked their relationship. I loved their kind of in-character banter. I do wish we'd seen a little bit more like kind of interaction and flirting out of character, but I still really liked what we did get. I think some of the moments in this were really cute, like the hand fasting ceremony, which is such a fun kind of like moment of like bringing them together. It just works so well, so I really enjoyed this and definitely recommend this for contemporary romance fans. Next, I read another romance, Act Your Age, Eve Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is, again, another adult contemporary romance, and this is the third and final book in the Brown Sisters trilogy, and I loved this book. I gave this one 5 stars, and gonna be honest, I was a little hesitant going in, not because I didn't want to read it or anything, but because from what I had seen of Eve in the previous books, I didn't love her, and I will admit I didn't really like her that much in this book. She started off very unsympathetic in her situation. I found myself more frustrated with how she handled it than finding myself sympathetic with her, which I think is what you were supposed to feel. But that being said, she did grow me a little bit through the book. I still don't love her, but I did like her a little better. But it is certainly a testament to Talia Hibbert's writing that despite me not ever really loving Eve, the romance in this worked so well that it didn't matter to me that I didn't love Eve. Like, the romance, the two of them, just fit together incredibly well, and it just totally overshadowed the fact that I didn't necessarily love one of them. Also, Talia Hibbert magically wove in so many rom-com moments that could have been so cheesy and forced, but they worked so naturally. It was amazing to see. It's like one of those things where a lesser author, I think, would be putting in all these moments, and you're just like, oh, another rom-com moment. Like, they're just trying to fit in as many, but it worked so well in this book. That includes also that kind of the conflict moment felt so natural in this book, and so that's just really a testament to Talia Hibbert's writing with this book. And I just really loved it. I thought the pacing was well done, everything from the development of their relationship to even kind of steps they took. Incredible, 5 stars. Definitely recommend this book. Next, I read Elatsoe by Darcie Littlebadger. This, unfortunately, was kind of my first meh read of the month. I gave this 3 stars. There were things about this I liked and things I didn't like. So for things I liked the weaving in of the Lipe and Apache culture. I thought that was really interesting, kind of just reading and learning about a culture I didn't know anything about, as well as the stories about Elatsoe's 6th great grandmother being weaved in and kind of added some nice little breaks in the storyline that I really enjoyed. I also thought the raising of dead animals was an interesting kind of power in the way it was in this world. I also liked the mystery plot. However, moving on to things I didn't like, while I did like the mystery plot, I felt like not enough time was spent on it, and I wish we had spent more time with it because I was very intrigued by it. And it just felt like there wasn't a lot of time spent on the actual mystery, which is kind of what the book was being sold as, like, this is what this book is about. It's about Elatsoe solving this mystery with the help of her dead animal raising powers. And it just felt like there was a lot of time spent on very random and kind of just tangential and throwaway comments that felt awkward in the book. And so I just think the writing style is part of why it just didn't work for me. As well, the tone was off with this book for me. It's a YA book, and it has a 17-year-old protagonist, but it felt like I was reading a 12-year-old protagonist, and either would have been fine. 17-year-old protagonist would have been fine with that, or a 12-year-old protagonist, but I think it needed to be, like, choose one, 17, and sound like she was 17, or her be 12 and sound like she was 12, not 17 sounding like she was 12, because that was just kind of disconnect for me. Yeah, so unfortunately, this one just wasn't the book for me. Next, I read When the Tiger Came Down the Mountain by Nghi. This is the second in the Singing Hill cycle novellas, and I thought this was delightful. I really enjoyed kind of the banter and relationship between the tigers and Chi, our narrator, the cleric, and how she would tell these stories, and then the tigers would be like, no, that's not what it's like. This is how it really went. It was fun. It was a fun story. I'm definitely intrigued by this world, and I'm excited to learn that Nghi has been contracted to write several more in this world. I look forward to reading more in this world again. Next, I read Dreaming of You by Lisa Kleypas. This is an adult historical romance book, and I picked this up because I really like the podcast Fated Mates, which is a romance podcast, and the 2 hosts of that podcast love this book a lot, so much, and I just picked it up because they loved it, and I saw it on sale on ebook one day. I was like, yeah, let's do it. So I didn't really know anything going into it, and I really liked it. Sarah is our main character. She's a writer, and she's kind of investigating the gambling hells of London as research for her new book, and I really loved her character. I love the arc she goes on from the beginning of where she started to kind of figuring out what she wants in life, and really specifically what she wants in a marriage and a future life with that person. I just thought it was a really good arc. I also really liked Derek Craven, our hero. He was a brooding hero, and he really worked for me. He pulled off the brooding in a way that I quite enjoyed, and I thought their love story was so good. The only thing about this book I didn't love was it had a cartoonishly evil other woman villain. It was like the jilted ex-lover. She was just so cartoonishly evil that I did not like her one bit. I know this is a little bit of an older book, and I know back kind of in the time this was published, I think the 90s? Yeah, so when this was published in the 90s, this whole jilted other woman trope was much more common, and it's not really as common as anymore, and so that's just definitely something that today, as a modern reader, I'm not into, but it did not ruin the book for me. It was just an unfortunate part I didn't like, especially the way it ended up. It was like a cartoonishly evil plot ending to that part of the plot to match the cartoonishly evil character. So that's the only downside, but otherwise I very much enjoyed this book and definitely want to read more by Lisa Kleypas. Next, I read The Priory of the Orange Tree by Samantha Shannon. This is a beast of an adult fantasy. This is a standalone book, and I enjoyed this. This was a buddy read on the Shelf Space Discord, and I know there was some conflicting opinions on people. Some people loved it, some people didn't. One person on that Discord said or described this story as kind of reading a history account of like this era in this nation's history. And I think that is a really good description, and that kind of sums up whether or not you might like it or you might not like it. So one thing I think that makes that a great description specifically is the characters in this book. While I liked them, none of them like wormed their way into my heart particularly, and that's fine for me. For me, I'm not a character-driven reader, so I don't need to like really connect with characters to like a book. Connecting with them to me is kind of could be like a difference between just a really good book and an all-time favorite, but if I don't connect with them and I like everything else about the book, it's still a really good book to me. I don't need that connection to like the book. But if you do, that's definitely something that I think you could find lacking in this book. It's also a little bit of a slower paced story, but again, I enjoyed it. I did not find that to be bothersome. This book could easily have been expanded into a duology and then fleshed out just a little bit more, but I do think it still worked fine as a standalone, and I did not find that like was really a huge detriment to the book. It didn't ruin it or anything. It just, I acknowledge it could have been a little better potentially as a slightly fleshed out duology or potentially a trilogy, but I still very much enjoyed it. The world in this is very well developed, very interesting, and I really liked that as well, as I did like the characters, and I very much enjoyed the plot in this book. Next, I read Firekeeper's Daughter by Angeline Boulley. This was a big surprise for me. I mentioned this in my mid-year freakout tag as my biggest surprise of the year for just how much I loved it. It's not that I didn't expect to like it. I just don't usually read YA mystery, and so I just wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did, and I really loved this. This is one of my favorite books of the month. It was barely edged out as my favorite right at the end of the month for the book coming up later, but I just loved it. I really loved the inclusion of the Ojibwe cultures and traditions. It was very immersive. I loved learning about this culture I didn't really know anything about, and how it was how a lot of their traditions were weaved in with the mystery storyline. It was really interesting. I liked our main character Adonis, and reading about her kind of struggle to fit in with both sides of her family, because she's half Ojibwe, and because she's only half Ojibwe, so trying to fit in with both sides of her family's cultures. I also found the mystery plot to be completely enthralling. It totally hooked me at the beginning and just didn't let go, and I blew through this book. I was completely invested in it, and I loved it. I love this book. I think everyone should read it. Next, I read an adult mystery, The Siren by Katherine St. John. So I really liked Katherine St. John's debut. I read, I think in like January? And so I picked up her newest one. This was told across 3 points of views of 3 women on this island who are shooting this movie, and I really liked it. The 3 characters started out pretty unlikable, which is something that often works for me in thrillers and mysteries, but this time they were unlikable to a point where it wasn't working with me, but they did very much grow on me as the story went on. It was like as we found out more of their story and like kind of their backstory and kind of what their stakes in the game of what was happening, I became more and more on their side as it were, and I just ended up liking them by the end. One of them, however, the assistant character, stood out to me as the most engaging of the 3 point of views. The other 2, the producer and the actress, kind of oscillated between a little sloggy of a point of view and very gripping, and so the assistant was gripping the whole way. Katherine St. John also uses flashbacks as part of her unraveling of the mystery story, which is something that just really works for me as a format. I just enjoy having kind of flashbacks to kind of reveal past things. That's something I know doesn't work for everyone, but it works for me, so I enjoyed that. And I found that in this book there was a mix of, I figured out a couple things that were going to be revealed before they were, but I didn't figure out everything, and I just like that mix. It both makes me feel smart, because I don't always figure out stuff, but also keeps me hooked, because I didn't figure out everything. So yeah, I enjoyed this thriller. Next, I read Summer of Salt by Katrina Leno. I'm going to preface this by saying this is not a book I would have picked up on my own if it had not been a book club pick, so I gave it a little bit of the benefit of the doubt in my kind of rating and review, acknowledging this is kind of a magical realism, which is not my thing, and so it wasn't set up to be like a 5-star read for me because of that, and so I did give it 3.5. It started out, it felt like it was kind of just going to be like one of those books that's just about the vibes, and I liked the vibes. I was kind of a small town on an island, and I'm into that, but I just didn't care much about the characters. There wasn't a lot of plot at the beginning, and the side characters didn't give me much. I just didn't care a ton about the characters. Our main character, Georgina, was fine. I liked her fine. I didn't hate her. She was just kind of neutral. Her sister, though, I really hated. I kind of hated every scene she was in. I just hated reading about her. And then the side characters were just fine. And then at the beginning, the plot just didn't give me much to care about either. So it's kind of just fine. But then the middle hit a mystery. The mystery got introduced, and I definitely picked up for me there because I was enjoying the whodunit aspect of this mystery. So the plot certainly picked up, and that definitely helped it kind of land more to 3.5 stars for me. And the action at the end also ramped up and got a little wild. It went directions I did not expect. This book ended up going directions much darker than I expected. It was intriguing. I had not heard anything about this book, and I don't know much about this author, so I've heard after our book club talking about it that if you've read other things about this author, you might have been more expecting it to kind of take that darker turn than me, who didn't know anything. So it was certainly interesting. I'm glad I read it, but it's definitely just not my kind of book. But, you know, I'm glad I read it and participated in the book club for it. And then next I read Fireborne by Rosaria and Munda. I loved this book. This book was so good. The hype is real for this book. I adored it. Usually when I read YA fantasy that kind of deals with revolutionary plot themes, it's usually like the main characters are part of the revolutionary group before the revolution, and we watch them like take over, do the revolution. But this one was like 10 years later, and our main characters have now grown up to be 17, 18 in this new regime, and they're part of the Dragon Rider class, who are kind of like the top of the hierarchy in this regime. And we see our characters really struggle a lot at times with decisions that the new regime makes, and there's a lot of internal struggle of, is the new regime better than the old one? Like, is it an improvement? Because there's a lot of things they do that I don't agree with, and it was really interesting to me. I also really liked both of our point of views. We get Annie and Nghi, and I think I liked Annie's point of view a little bit better, which I think might be an unpopular opinion. I think most people like Nghi's better, but I did like both. I will say they are both in the first person point of view, which doesn't bother me, but I know some people has listed as something that did bother them, so just throwing that out there. I also really, really liked Annie and Nghi's relationship because it was like it was complicated. They grew up in an orphanage together. There was a lot of struggle, but there was like the friendship aspect. There was a little bit of kind of a romance in there. There was also kind of like the relationship as like colleagues, I guess, like co-workers and there's dragon riders, and there was just a lot of layers. I find their relationship to be complicated and intriguing and very interesting to read about. So yeah, I definitely recommend this. I'm going to go ahead and talk about book 2, which I also read this month, a little later in the month, because I loved book 2 as well. Book 2, Flamefall, was my favorite book of the month. It was incredible. I finished Flamefall and my thoughts were just like incoherent screaming. It was so good. There was political maneuvering. There was so much just like complicated decision making that was just pulled off so well that constantly left me being like, what are they gonna do? What's gonna happen? I don't know. And I got so attached with so many of the characters. Without getting too detailed into the plot itself, there is a new third point of view introduced in book 2 that I thought was a great addition, because it gave us another viewpoint around the world and story that really rounds out the story in the world very well. There's also a character we see through that point of view that I really like, and they're all it's all complicated. Like liking so many of these characters is so complicated because there's so many like pros and cons and good and bad and who really is good and bad and all these decisions they make, and it was just great. The series is great. I cannot wait for the third one. Incredible, so good. Next, I read The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. This is an adult fantasy standalone, and this book falls into the category that sometimes book fall into me, which was, this has problems, but I liked it despite them. So the next little tidbit might sound a little negative, but I promise I did like it. And that is, so I'll start with the negative and end with the positive. And so one thing I didn't like was how our main character Beatrice made decisions. She starts off this book with 2 kind of options and paths to go down that both have the end goal of helping her family. And at some point in the book, it becomes very clear to her that one of these options will not happen, will not work. Things are said to her by other characters that would need to be on board with this option for it to work that make it very clear to her they would never be on board and this option will never work. And yet she kept, and I understood a little bit, I understood her kind of still debating it a little bit, but there was a point where I was like, all right, it's very clear this isn't going to work. I'm going to need you to figure that out. I understand you have some emotions to tie to this decision. It's not completely just like logical decision. There's an emotional part too, but it's very clear it won't work out. And then when she tries to do it, it blows up in her face. She's shocked. I'm like, this was so predictable. That was a little annoying. I also found her father to be a completely irredeemable character in this book, and I thought he was dealt with too softly in the end. Like, I was just like, nah, bruh, he sucked. That's just how it was. He sucked. He sucked super hard. However, things I did like, I thought the main romance was cute. I really loved the world. This is like a historical Regency romance-esque setting, and I was very into that because I've been very in the mood for historical romance settings recently, so that really hit that spot very nicely. I also thought it was interesting we kind of saw two different cultures around the magic in this. We had Beatrice's culture, which was very, very strict, and then Ianthe, who's our male character's culture, which is still strict but much more relaxed than Beatrice's culture. And I just thought the way these two cultures responded to the same kind of magic and usage and kind of developed differently was just really interesting. I also thought the whole women couldn't use magic in this book was done in a different way. I had expected it to just be a men don't let women do magic because men think they're better than women. And that is part of it. But there is also a part of this book that there's like part of the reason women can't do magic is there's a very real physical danger present with women that has to do with pregnancies. Like, if they're pregnant and using magic, bad things will happen to them. And so there's like a literal reason that women cannot do it and men can. However, the kind of misogynistic men are better than women view did still come in that, well, we can't do magic right now, but why has no one looked into if there's a way to make it safe for women, or like researching ways in which women could do it, which is kind of the direction this book ends up exploring. Is like, I understand as it is we don't know how women can, but surely we could figure out a way. But because the culture is misogynistic culture, very patriarchal culture, the men never think to think that way. So I just thought that was different, kind of a combination of just the cultural men over women, and also like an actual literal physical reason women couldn't do magic. So I was unexpected and pleasantly surprised by that. Next, I read Love Songs for Skeptics by Christina Pishiris, which is an adult contemporary romance, and I didn't like this book. This book features a love triangle and then kind of a secondary plot of our main character Zoe, who is trying to save her music magazine by finding the sought-after legendary singer and interviewing her. And so I liked one or two things about this book, which is why I gave it 2 stars and not 1, and that was I liked the relationship Zoe built with her future sister-in-law. I just thought it was a really well done building of a friendship relationship between two people who kind of start off as people who don't really have much in common, but end up interacting a lot because the family aspect. I just thought that was well done, and I was interested to see if Zoe would get the interview and save her magazine. Now, on to what I didn't like. I'm going to starting off, so the love triangle, the side of the triangle that ended up being the guy she ended up with was, at best, a B plot for the first 60% of this book, which is just not great, because then at the last chunk of this book, when that plot finally like ramped up to like the big confession of love or whatever, it felt so out of nowhere because it spent time as a B plot for so much of the book that I was just like, this is out of nowhere, coming from nowhere. I will say though that guy, the guy that the B plot guy, I did kind of like. He had potential. If only we had seen him more. If only. And then for the first part of the book, the love triangle side that didn't work out was just not good. It wasn't good. It wasn't a good romance storyline there anyways. It was very one-sided on Zoe's part and kind of cringy. It was kind of cringy, and I didn't enjoy reading it. And the guy she was like lusting after wasn't very good. He wasn't a good guy. He wasn't a good character, so I couldn't even like understand the obsession. So it was just not great. It wasn't good. I didn't love it. And yeah, this was 2-star, and I would not recommend this book. Next, I read The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune, and I don't really know what much I can say about this book that hasn't already been said. It had some good commentary mixed within the completely wholesome nature of the majority of the story, which I wasn't expecting and enjoyed. And the kids in this book are just adorable. They're adorable. They're wholesome. I love them with my whole heart. They're just good. They're just good. It's just a happy book, and I don't know what else to say. Like, everyone talked about this book because everyone loves it, and I just liked it. I liked it. It was good. It was cute. Next, I read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This was one of my more anticipated books of the year because I love The Martian by this author. The Martian's probably my favorite science fiction novel as of right now, and I was very excited for this one, and it got a lot of hype in my mind because of that. I also saw a lot of really good reviews from people who picked it up before I did, loving it, and even saying it was better than The Martian. And I will say, it did not quite live up to that hype, but I did still really like it. I did not think this was better than The Martian. The Martian still is number one between these two in my mind. But I did like this. Our main character, Ryland Grace, has kind of a similar sense of humor to The Martian, which is one thing I liked about that book. However, this time, in the beginning of the book, the humor did not work for me initially. It just didn't hit. It just didn't hit for a while, and at some point it clicked, and it hit, and I enjoyed him a lot better after that. So for most of the book it worked, but it did start off a little miss for me. I also really liked this kind of sidekick character, Rocky. His interactions between Ryland Grace and Rocky were very fun and wholesome. It was definitely entertaining. And this book is told in two timelines. We have the current timeline of Ryland Grace in space trying to figure stuff out, and then the flashbacks to before he gets to space, when he's back on Earth, and when this whole Project Hail Mary kind of becomes a whole thing on Earth. And I liked the flashback timeline better, partially because I liked one of the characters in the flashback timelines a lot. The woman who was in charge of Project Hail Mary, I loved her. She was great. She had this like no nonsense, get stuff done attitude that I just enjoyed. And also, I enjoyed the science in the flashbacks better than the science in the current timeline. The current timeline science stuff sometimes just got too detailed for me, which I understand this is science fiction. Like, I get that. I'm not trying to say I want to know science, but just sometimes it like spent too much detail on something. I was just like, okay. Whereas the science in the flashbacks I liked better. It didn't get as overly detailed personally for me. Again, this is a science fiction novel, so like I'm not trashing the novel because of this. I did still very much enjoy this book. I gave it a 4-star, and well, I didn't think it was good as The Martian. I definitely still really enjoyed it. And if you really like hard sci-fi, definitely recommend this. If you like more soft sci-fi, which I tend towards the soft sci-fi, you might not like it as much, just again because of how detailed the science gets in. Just like, know that going into it, so you don't get into it and just trash a science fiction book for having science, right? Because I feel silly saying it. I feel really silly saying it, but that's just how I felt, So, next I read The Night Swim by Megan Golden. This was an adult mystery, more mystery than thriller, but I enjoyed this. This is told in 3 points of view. We have our main character, who is a podcaster, and then we have episodes of her podcast as she is in this town, kind of live covering this rape trial, and then we have kind of flashback stories telling a story of a cold case from this town where someone has reached out to our podcaster to be like, I want your help solving this cold case. What happened to my sister? And I enjoyed it. I thought the podcast episodes offered thought-provoking commentary kind of just on the rape cases and kind of rape culture. In addition, I was interested in both I was hooked by the trial and all of the courtroom scenes and finding out like how the trial ended up, as well as I was also very intrigued by the cold case story. I thought they were both equally as interesting. I did think it was sometimes too easy how our main character was just kind of able to talk to who she wanted usually and just kind of find out what she needed. It felt a little too easy at times, but I still very much enjoyed the plot of the story. And then lastly, I read All the Tides of Fate by Adeline Grace. This is the second and last book in the All the Stars and Teeth duology, and it's kind of a letdown. I gave this a 3-star. It was just fine. It felt like it was missing some of the magic that I liked in the first book. Not magic, like literal magic, just like the magic of reading it. And so we had the same kind of core group of characters out on the ship sailing the seas again, but it was just missing some of that fun adventuring group dynamics that I liked in the first book. It felt like it went from a book about this group to a book more hyper-focused on Amora, the main character, and I just wasn't vibing with her as much in this book, so I didn't like how it felt more focused on her than the first one. And part of why I wasn't vibing with her was I was very annoyed with her decision making. She was looking for this item to solve this problem, and when she found the item, she learned that it could be used to do this other thing, and the other thing had a lot of emotions tied to it. I sound like I'm repeating myself from the Midnight Bargain, but I guess I had similar problems. But so this other thing she found the item could do, I did not expect her to just dismiss it out of hand because there was a lot of emotions tied into it, very understandably. However, it felt very, very clear to me that her original goal was obviously the right choice for so many obvious reasons. And she kind of got wrapped up in the other choice for a little bit, which again, it was very emotional, so I understood. However, she got wrapped up into it way too long. She debated it back and forth so much, it became very tiresome. I was just like, I cannot believe you're still considering this. It's so obvious that it's the wrong choice. So obvious. So I found that tiresome. I also think this book didn't need to exist. Like, the end of the first book is where I originally thought the second book would end, just like knowing what the overarching plot of the first book was when I was reading it. I was like, oh, it'll end, book 2 will end at this spot. And that's where book 1 ended. And I was like, huh, I wonder what they're gonna do with book 2. And the answer was, she could have put this in book 1. This book is not very long. It is a similar length to book 1. She very easily could have combined it into one, because this book had a central plot line, but it also felt like it had a lot of fluff surrounding that plot line that only existed to get this to a full-length book. And I think if she'd taken out that fluff and put this plot line in with the first one, it would have worked way better. But I will say, the very end of this book really hit me in the feels. It was a unexpectedly very emotional ending. And it came out of like, no, it was like surprising, and I was like, dang, wow, she really got me with that ending. So props to that ending though, I will say. She really nailed it with that. Still hurts a little bit. So that was my speed run wrap up for June. If you read any of these books, let me know what you thought of them in the comments below, and I will see you in my next video.